The hallway of the music academy was quiet that morning, the kind of calm that only existed before the students filled it with chatter, laughter, and the echo of piano notes. Henry Walker pushed his cleaning cart slowly down the corridor, the familiar squeak of the wheels keeping him company. He had worked in this building for almost 8 years now. Every morning he arrived before sunrise, long before the teachers or the students, to make sure everything looked perfect for the day ahead. He didn't mind the work. There was something peaceful about those early hours when the world was still half asleep. The smell of polished wood, the soft hum of fluorescent lights, and the faint scent of old sheet music always gave him comfort. He loved this place more than he could explain, not because of the job itself, but because of what it represented. Music. When he was younger, Henry used to dream of becoming a pianist. Back then his family didn't have much, but his father once found an old upright piano at a garage sale and managed to buy it for almost nothing. Henry taught himself to play by ear. He would sit for hours every night after work, trying to copy the songs he heard on the radio. But life didn't turn out the way he hoped. His father got sick, bills piled up, and Henry had to give up his dream to take care of his family. Music slowly faded from his life, replaced by long days of labor and short nights of rest. Still, even after all those years, he never stopped loving the sound of the piano. It was his one reminder that beauty could still exist in an ordinary life. That morning, Henry walked into the grand performance hall. Sunlight poured through the high windows, bouncing off the polished floors and the rows of empty seats. In the center of the stage sat the Academy's most prized possession, a glossy black grand piano that shone like a mirror. It was said to be worth more than most people's homes. Henry looked at it for a long time, just standing there with his mop in hand. He always admired that piano from afar. He wasn't supposed to touch it. That rule was made very clear to every staff member. Only students and teachers were allowed near it. But sometimes, when he was sure no one was around, he would let his fingers brush across the keys just for a second. He told himself it didn't count as breaking the rule if he didn't actually play. Today, though, something was different. He had finished all his morning tasks early. The building was still quiet. He stood there on the stage, staring at the piano, his heart beating a little faster. He knew he shouldn't, but he couldn't help it. He sat down carefully on the bench, his calloused hands hovering above the keys. He took a deep breath and pressed one note in a soft, low C. The sound echoed through the hall, rich and deep. For a moment it felt like time stopped. Then another note and another. Soon his fingers began to move on their own, as if they had been waiting for this moment for years. The melody was something he had made up long ago, when he was still a young man with dreams in his eyes. It was simple but filled with emotion. The notes told his story of struggle, of quiet hope, of a man who had loved something deeply but had to let it go. Henry didn't notice that the door to the hall had opened. From the back, someone stood watching him. It was Clara Reynolds, one of the Academy's most respected piano teachers. She was known for her discipline and her sharp tongue. Students often feared her critiques, but no one could deny her talent. To her, music was not just an art, it was a form of perfection. And perfection, in her mind, came only through years of proper training and technical skill. She frowned as she watched Henry play. A janitor sitting at her piano? The very thought made her blood boil. To her, this was not just inappropriate, and it was disrespectful. Without a sound, she began walking down the aisle toward the stage, her heels clicking sharply on the floor. Henry was still lost in his music when she shouted, "What do you think you're doing?" The sound of her voice startled him so badly that he almost jumped off the bench. His hands froze in midair. For a moment he couldn't speak. His face turned pale as he looked up and saw her standing there, arms crossed, anger burning in her eyes. I'm sorry, ma'am," he stammered, standing up quickly. You were just what?" she interrupted, her voice cold and sharp. "Defiling a concert instrument that costs more than your entire year's salary?" Henry looked down at the floor. "I didn't mean any harm. This piano is not a toy for janitors to play with," she snapped. "It's meant for musicians. Real musicians. People who understand its value." He felt a lump rise in his throat. "Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry." At that moment, a few students who had been walking by heard the commotion and stepped into the hall. They stopped near the back rows, whispering and chuckling as they realized what was happening. One of them muttered under his breath, The janitor thinks he's Beethoven." The others laughed quietly. Henry could hear them, though he pretended not to. His face burned with shame. He picked up his mop and bucket, trying to make himself as small as possible. Clara continued, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. "I don't ever want to see you near this piano again. Do you understand me?" "Yes, ma'am," he said softly. "Good," she said, adjusting her jacket. "Now clean this stage properly and stay in your place." She turned and walked away without another word. The students lingered for a moment, still giggling, before following her out. Soon Henry was alone again in the empty hall. The silence felt heavier than before. He stood there for a long moment, staring at the piano. His reflection looked back at him from its glossy surface. Tired eyes, rough hands, a face lined with years of hard work. He reached out slowly, almost instinctively, and touched one key with his fingertip. The note rang out softly like a faint whisper. Then he pulled his hand away and sighed. Maybe she was right, he thought. Maybe people like him weren't meant for things like this. He picked up his mop and began cleaning the stage again, though now his movements were slower, his shoulders heavy. Every sound, the swish of the mop, the squeak of the bucket, seemed to echo his humiliation. But under that pain, a small flame of something else began to stir in his chest. It wasn't anger. It was something quieter, something like determination. That night, after everyone had gone home, Henry stayed behind a little longer. The building was dark except for a single lamp near the stage. He sat down on one of the back seats, staring at the piano from afar. He wanted to play again, to prove to himself that what he felt wasn't foolish. But he knew that if anyone found out, he could lose his job. And this job was all he had. So he just sat there listening to the silence. He remembered the first time he ever touched a piano. He was 10 years old, and his school had one in the auditorium. During recess, while everyone else played outside, he snuck in and pressed one key. That tiny sound changed everything for him. He didn't know why, but something about it made him feel alive, like the world suddenly had color. He spent the next few years teaching himself on an imaginary keyboard he drew on his desk. When his father finally brought home that old second-hand piano, Henry felt like the luckiest boy in the world. Now, decades later, he was still that boy deep down, the one who just wanted to play. He stayed there until almost midnight, lost in thought before finally locking up and heading home. His apartment was small and old, with peeling paint and creaky floors. In the corner of the living room stood a broken keyboard he had bought at a thrift shop years ago. Half the keys didn't even work, but it was enough for him. He sat down and began to play softly, careful not to wake his neighbors. As the melody filled the room, he felt the weight of the day slowly lift from his shoulders. Music had always been his refuge, the one place where he could forget who he was and remember who he wanted to be. He closed his eyes and let his fingers move freely, the way they always wanted to on that grand piano. He didn't know that someone had seen everything earlier that day, one of the students who hadn't laughed. She had watched from the back row as Clara humiliated him, her heart twisting with discomfort. There was something about the way Henry had played before being interrupted that she couldn't forget. It wasn't just skill, it was emotion, something raw and honest that none of the students at the academy ever seemed to have. As Henry fell asleep that night, exhausted but strangely calm, the events of the day replayed in his mind. The embarrassment still stung, but there was a small part of him that refused to let it define him. He didn't know why, but something deep inside told him that his story with that piano wasn't over yet. Somewhere across town, the young student who had seen everything couldn't sleep either. She kept thinking about the janitor's hands moving across the keys, the way the sound filled the room with feeling. She wondered what his story was, how he had learned to play like that without any training. The next morning, Henry would return to the academy as he always did, pushing his cleaning cart and keeping to himself. Clara would pass him in the hallway without a glance. The students would walk past, laughing and talking about their lessons. Everything would look the same as before. But beneath that quiet routine, something was beginning to change, something that neither Henry nor anyone else could see yet. It started with a spark, a single moment of humiliation that would soon turn into something far greater. Because sometimes the world notices the people it overlooks, just not in the way anyone expects. The next day, the academy was buzzing with life again. Students rushed through the halls carrying sheet music and coffee cups, chatting about recitals and exams. The sound of pianos echoed from every practice room, a mix of scales, arpeggios, and nervous mistakes. Henry walked in quietly, just like he did every morning. He didn't make eye contact with anyone as he pushed his cleaning cart through the long hallway. He kept his head down, focusing on his work, but inside his mind was still replaying what had happened the day before. He could still hear the teacher's harsh words echoing in his head. Every time he thought about it, his chest tightened. He tried to shake it off. He had been embarrassed plenty of times in life, but somehow this one hurt differently. Maybe it was because the piano meant something to him, something personal. It wasn't just an instrument. It was a piece of his heart. He didn't see the young student who had witnessed everything the day before. She was sitting quietly on the second-floor balcony, where students often studied between classes. Her name was Lily. She was a second-year student at the academy, known for her shy nature. She loved music deeply, but unlike many of her classmates, she didn't play for attention or praise. She played because it made her feel alive. Lily had seen Henry play before Clara interrupted him. She remembered the look on his face while his hands moved across the keys, the peace, the honesty. It was different from the way most students played, trying to impress or show off their skill. There was something pure about the way he played, something real. All morning, Lily couldn't stop thinking about it. She even tried to play the same melody she had heard from him, but she couldn't quite capture it. It wasn't about the notes. It was about the feeling behind them. Later that day, after classes were over, she decided to stay behind. The other students were gone, and the building was slowly emptying. She waited near the back entrance where she knew Henry usually went to store his cleaning supplies. When he appeared, she hesitated for a moment, nervous. Then she called out softly, "Excuse me, sir?" Henry turned, surprised. It wasn't often that students spoke to him. "Oh, hello there," he said kindly, his voice quiet. "I'm sorry to bother you," she said, holding her hands together. I saw what happened yesterday. When you were playing," his face flushed. "Ah," he murmured, looking away. "That was nothing. I shouldn't have touched that piano." "I know better." "No, please," she said quickly, stepping closer. "It wasn't nothing. The way you played, it was beautiful. I've never heard something like that." He smiled a little, embarrassed. "You're being kind, miss. I was just fooling around." "It didn't sound like fooling around," she said, her voice soft but steady. "You played with more feeling than most people here." "I really mean it." Henry didn't know how to respond. No one had ever complimented his playing before. Not in decades, at least. "Thank you," he said finally, his eyes gentle but uncertain. "That means more than you think." Lily hesitated, then asked, "Would you play again, maybe just once?" "I won't tell anyone, I promise." He laughed quietly, shaking his head. "If that teacher caught me again, I'd lose my job. I can't risk that." "I understand," she said, disappointed but respectful. "I just wanted you to know that someone appreciated it." She smiled politely and started to walk away, but Henry called after her. "Wait." She turned around. He looked at the clock on the wall. "The night guard doesn't come in until 10, he said slowly. "If you happen to be here around 9, maybe I'll still be cleaning the hall." Lily's eyes lit up and she nodded quickly. "I'll be here." That night at exactly 9 o'clock, the academy was nearly silent. The lights were dimmed, and the sound of footsteps echoed faintly in the long hallways. Henry was sweeping the stage when he saw Lily walk in, clutching a small notebook. He smiled nervously. "You're on time," he said softly. "I wouldn't miss it," she replied. He looked around to make sure the coast was clear, then sat down at the piano. His hands hovered above the keys for a moment before he began to play. The same melody from before flowed through the room, slow, warm, and full of emotion. Lily sat on the floor near the front row, completely still, listening as if she didn't want to miss a single note. Henry played as if the world outside didn't exist. His eyes were closed, his shoulders relaxed, and his fingers moved with grace and confidence. He wasn't thinking about rules or reputation. He was just playing, the way he used to when he was young, when life felt full of possibilities. When he finished, the hall was quiet except for the fading echo of the last note. Lily wiped a tear from her cheek. "That was incredible," she whispered. "Why don't you play anymore?" "You should be up there performing." He smiled faintly. Life doesn't always go the way you plan, he said. When I was young, I wanted to study music, but I couldn't afford it. Then I had to work. One thing led to another, and the dream just slipped away. But your talent didn't, she said softly. You still have it. Henry looked at her, surprised by her sincerity. You remind me of myself when I was your age, he said gently. Full of heart. Don't lose that, all right? Lily nodded, but she wasn't done yet. Can I record you next time? She asked. Just for myself. I promise I won't show anyone without your permission. He hesitated for a moment, then shrugged. Sure, why not? Just don't let the teachers find out. The next evening they met again. Henry played a few different melodies, some soft and haunting, others joyful and light. Lily recorded them all quietly from her seat. She could see the emotion in every movement of his hands. There was something in the way he played that told a story words never could. When she got home that night, she listened to the recordings over and over. One of them, the first one, touched her the most. She decided to upload a short clip to her social media page, just to share something beautiful. She didn't include his name or face clearly. She simply titled it, The Janitor Who Plays with His Heart. She didn't expect anything to happen. But within hours, the video began to spread. By the next morning, it had thousands of views. People commented things like, This man plays with more soul than anyone I've heard, and you can feel his story in every note. Lily was shocked. She hadn't even tagged the academy, but somehow people found out where the video was filmed. By the end of the day, the views had jumped to hundreds of thousands. Henry had no idea. He was busy doing his usual work, emptying trash bins, cleaning mirrors, sweeping floors. When he passed Lily in the hall, she looked excited, almost nervous. I need to tell you something, she whispered. That video I recorded? It's gone viral, Henry blinked. Viral? What does that mean? It means millions of people are watching it online. Everyone's talking about you, he stared at her, confused. Millions? She nodded. They love your music, Henry. They're saying you're a hidden genius. He didn't know what to say. He had never even used social media. The idea of millions of people listening to him felt unreal. You didn't get in trouble for posting it, did you? He asked quietly. Not yet, she said with a small laugh. But the video is spreading fast. Reporters are already asking who you are. Henry felt his heart race. He didn't want fame. He just wanted to play. But deep down there was a small spark of pride, the kind he hadn't felt in years. Later that evening, while mopping the entrance hall, he overheard two students talking. Did you see that video of the janitor? One said. He's amazing. I know, the other replied. That's him, right? The guy who cleans the practice rooms? Henry pretended not to hear, but inside he felt both nervous and happy. Maybe, just maybe, people were finally seeing him for something more than just the janitor. That night, Lily showed him the comments under the video. Thousands of people from around the world were praising his talent. Some wrote that his music had made them cry. Others said they hadn't felt so moved in years. Henry read them quietly, his hands trembling slightly. All these people, he murmured, and they don't even know me. They know your heart, Lily said softly. He smiled, but his eyes were full of tears. You don't know what this means to me, he said. For so long I thought my music didn't matter, that it was too late. It's never too late, she replied. You've proved that. As they spoke, neither of them knew that the video had already reached the academy's administration. A few teachers were shocked. Others were skeptical. But when Clara Reynolds, the same teacher who had humiliated him, saw the video, she turned pale. She recognized the hall, she recognized the piano, and she recognized the man. She watched the entire clip in silence, the same melody she had interrupted echoing through her speakers. For the first time in a long while, she felt something shift inside. Hers a mix of guilt and disbelief. Henry didn't know that his quiet act of courage, sitting at a piano and following. His heart was about to change everything. As he walked home that night under the streetlights, the world felt a little different. The air seemed lighter, the city sound softer. He didn't have money, fame, or power, but he had something that couldn't be bought. The gift of touching people's hearts through his music. He still didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But one thing was certain. His story was no longer hidden. The world had started to listen. The video had spread like wildfire. By the time Henry woke up the next morning, his name was everywhere. Students at the academy whispered about him in the halls. Teachers exchanged quiet conversations in the staff room, and online, his video had millions of views. People who had never heard of the academy were now sharing his performance, calling him the janitor with the heart of a musician. It felt like the world had turned upside down. Henry didn't know how to handle it. He had never been someone who craved attention, and now suddenly his talent was in the spotlight. He couldn't walk through the academy without hearing someone mention the video or see a comment pop up on his phone from someone who had watched it. Most of the comments were positive, telling him he should be on stage, that his music had changed their day. But even in all the praise, there was a knot in his stomach. That morning, as he pushed his cleaning cart down the hall, he noticed more students were watching him than usual. Some waved, others simply stared at him as he passed. The looks weren't unkind, but they were different. It was as if they were seeing him for the first time, and it made Henry feel awkward. He wasn't used to being noticed. As he walked past the music rooms, he could hear the familiar sounds of students practicing, each lost in their own world of scales and exercises. But today it felt different. The music seemed to echo off the walls more than usual, and Henry couldn't help but think of the piano, the one that had been at the center of it all. Later that day, when he was cleaning the practice room closest to the grand piano, Clara Reynolds, the piano teacher who had humiliated him just days earlier, walked in. She had a cold, professional expression on her face. Henry stopped what he was doing and stood up quickly, but Clara didn't seem to notice. She walked straight past him, her eyes fixed on the piano. "Clean this area thoroughly, Mr. Walker," she said in a voice that was somehow sharper than usual. Henry nodded quietly, avoiding her gaze. He wasn't sure if she was upset because of the viral video or if something else was bothering her. He had learned to be careful around her. Clara paused as she reached the piano. She reached out and touched the lid, her fingers brushing the polished surface. For a moment, Henry thought she might say something about the video, but she didn't. She simply stood there, silent, staring at the piano as if lost in thought. "I'll make sure it's cleaned properly," Henry said softly, his voice tentative. Clara didn't respond, and the tension in the room thickened. Henry continued with his work, trying to ignore the uncomfortable silence. But just as he turned to leave, Clara's voice stopped him. "Mr. Walker," she said, her tone now softer, but with a hint of something else. "The video, it's everywhere." Henry turned slowly to face her, his heart skipping a beat. He wasn't sure if she was going to scold him again, or if she was going to congratulate him. He didn't know what he expected, but the word she spoke next surprised him. It was impressive, she said, still not looking at him. "The way you played, I didn't realize you had that kind of skill." Henry didn't know how to respond. For a moment he simply stared at her, wondering if she was being sincere. He had spent so many years working under her gaze, feeling less than, that hearing her say something positive made him unsure of how to react. "Thank you," he said finally, his voice quiet. "I never meant for anyone to see it," Clara nodded. "Of course you didn't. But now that it's out there, I hope you understand the responsibility that comes with this kind of attention." Henry didn't fully understand what she meant, but he nodded anyway. He hadn't expected anything from the video. He hadn't even wanted to be noticed. But now things were changing. People were seeing him differently, and it was a little overwhelming. After a moment, Clara turned to leave. As she passed by him, she paused and added, "Just remember, there's a difference between playing for yourself and playing for an audience. The world will expect something different from you now." Henry stood there for a moment, wondering what she meant by that. But before he could think too much about it, he heard a voice from behind him. "Hey, Mr. Walker." He turned around to find one of the students, a young man named Ethan, walking toward him with a big smile on his face. "I just wanted to say," Ethan said, his voice full of excitement, "that video of you playing, it was amazing. I've never heard anything like it. Seriously, you should be on stage somewhere, not cleaning up after us." Henry felt his face flush. "Oh, well, thank you. I just play for myself. I'm not really a performer." Ethan shook his head. "You're too modest, man. People don't play like that unless they've got something special. You should really think about performing. You could teach us a thing or two." Henry didn't know what to say. He wasn't sure he was ready for that kind of attention. Performing meant facing a room full of people, something he hadn't done in years. But Ethan's words made him think just for a moment about the possibilities. Maybe he wasn't done with music after all. Maybe there was still something he could do with the talent he had buried for so long. Later that day, after his shift ended, Henry found himself walking home in the evening breeze. The streets quieter than usual. His phone buzzed in his pocket, and when he pulled it out, he saw a new message from Lily. "Henry, I hope you're okay. I just wanted to let you know that there's been some big news about your video. Some people want to interview you. News outlets are reaching out. They want to know more about the janitor who plays the piano. They're calling you a hidden gem." He read the message several times, unsure of what to think. Interview? News outlets? This was getting out of hand. He wasn't ready for this kind of attention. He just wanted to keep his life simple, to play for the joy of it, not for fame or recognition. But it seemed like the world had other plans. When he got home, he sat down at the broken keyboard in the corner of his living room. It was quiet here, away from the noise of the academy and the world outside. He placed his hands on the keys and began to play, the melody filling the small apartment, the only sound that made him feel at peace. But even as he played, his mind kept drifting back to the messages, the comments, the video that had taken on a life of its own. He wasn't sure if he was ready for all of this. Was he ready to be someone people looked up to have his music judged by strangers? He didn't know. That night, after finishing his usual routine, Henry lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about all that had happened in such a short time. Everything was changing, and he wasn't sure how to keep up. He had never thought of himself as anything special. Just a man who loved music and had to let go of his dream long ago. Now it seemed as though everyone around him was suddenly aware of him, and the world was asking him to step into a spotlight he wasn't sure he wanted. The next morning, things took another turn. The academy called Henry into the office. He wasn't sure what to expect. He was greeted by the head of administration, the same man who had hired him all those years ago. He didn't seem angry, but there was something in his eyes, something Henry couldn't quite place. "Mr. Walker," the head of administration began, his voice calm. "We've been discussing the video. It seems to have become quite the sensation. People are calling it one of the most emotional performances they've ever heard." Henry swallowed, feeling his heart race. "I didn't mean for it to go viral," he said quickly. "I was just playing." The head of administration nodded. "We understand. But we also have to acknowledge the reality of the situation. This kind of attention is unusual, and while we're proud of the academy being in the spotlight, we need to address how this will affect the way the academy is perceived." Henry felt a wave of anxiety wash over him. "I didn't do anything wrong," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "No, of course not," the administrator replied. "But we have to be careful about how we handle this. People are asking for interviews, appearances, and some of our donors are requesting that we take a more professional approach to this situation." Henry didn't know what to say. "What do you want from me?" The administrator leaned forward, his tone softening. "We think it would be a good idea for you to at least consider a public appearance. A performance. It doesn't have to be anything major, just a chance for you to share your talent with the public." Henry's mind raced. He had spent years avoiding the spotlight, and now it was being thrust upon him. Could he really do it? Could he perform for an audience for real? "I'll think about it," he said quietly, his heart pounding. But inside, he knew that everything was about to change. The days that followed were filled with a mix of excitement and uncertainty. Henry's mind was constantly spinning with the overwhelming attention he had suddenly received. Every time he opened his phone, there was another message or comment, another request for an interview. He didn't know how to keep up with it all. The academy had arranged a meeting for him to discuss his next steps, and the pressure was mounting. They wanted him to perform. A public performance with an audience, cameras, and reporters. It sounded like a dream come true for some people, but to Henry it felt like a nightmare. He had never been comfortable with attention. He was used to working quietly in the background, doing his job without anyone noticing. But now his life had been turned upside down. The one thing that had always given him peace in his music was now pulling him into a world he wasn't ready for. The more he thought about it, the more he realized that performing in front of a crowd wasn't just about playing the piano. It was about facing judgment, about putting himself out there in a way he hadn't done in years. The thought of standing on stage, the spotlight shining on him, made his palms sweat. Still, A small part of him couldn't ignore the voice in his head telling him that this could be his chance to finally share his passion with the world. Maybe it wasn't just about being famous or getting attention. Maybe it was about sharing something real, something honest, with people who would appreciate it. The night before the meeting, Henry found himself sitting in his small apartment, looking at the worn keys of his old keyboard. He hadn't played on a grand piano in days. He had been avoiding it, afraid that if he played again, he might feel the weight of the world watching him. But as the night grew quiet, he couldn't help himself. He sat down at the keyboard and let his fingers move slowly over the keys. The familiar melody began to take shape, just like it had so many times before. He closed his eyes, losing himself in the music. For a few minutes, everything else disappeared. He wasn't a janitor anymore. He wasn't a man who had lived his life quietly in the shadows. He was just a musician playing from the heart. When he finished, he sat back and let out a deep breath. It wasn't perfect. There were mistakes, moments when his hands didn't quite hit the right notes. But that didn't matter. What mattered was the feeling behind it, the honesty, the emotion. The next day, Henry went to the academy, his nerves a little more settled. The meeting was held in a small private room with a long table. The head of administration was there along with Clara and a few other faculty members. They all greeted him with polite smiles, but there was a tension in the air. "So, Mr. Walker," the head of administration began, his voice calm but firm, "as you know, your performance video has gone viral. We're very proud of you, of course, but now we have to decide what comes next. We've been talking about a potential performance, a chance for you to share your music with the world." Henry nodded, his hands clenched in his lap. He wasn't sure how to respond. The thought of performing in front of so many people still terrified him. But at the same time, there was a part of him that felt like he couldn't back out now. "I'm not sure I'm ready for something like that," he said quietly. "I've spent years avoiding the spotlight. I'm just a janitor, a man who loves to play the piano." Clara, who had been sitting quietly, spoke up. "It's not just about performing for fame, Mr. Walker. It's about sharing something real. You have a gift and people want to hear it. There's a beauty in your music that's rare, something people don't get to experience every day. It would be a shame to hide that away." Henry looked at her, surprised. He hadn't expected her to say something like that. Clara, who had always seemed so distant, almost critical, was now speaking as though she understood. "I'm not a performer," Henry said, shaking his head. "I've never wanted to be. I'm fine doing what I do, but now with all of this attention, I don't know what to do with it." The head of administration leaned forward, his tone gentle but persistent. "We understand your hesitation, Mr. Walker, but think about it. This could be an opportunity not just for you, but for the entire academy. You're an example of what passion and perseverance can do. You've spent your life working quietly, and now the world is paying attention. Don't you think you owe it to yourself, to your music, to step up?" Henry sat in silence, his mind racing. He thought about all the people who had commented on the video, the messages of encouragement, the way people were inspired by his music. He thought about the years he had spent burying his dreams, convincing himself that it was too late to do anything meaningful with his talent. Maybe they were right. Maybe it wasn't about being a performer in the traditional sense. Maybe it was about sharing a piece of his heart just as he had done in that video. "Okay," he said finally, his voice quiet but firm. "I'll do it. I'll perform." The room seemed to breathe a collective sigh of relief. The head of administration smiled. Clara nodded approvingly, and the others exchanged looks of satisfaction. "Great," the head of administration said. "We'll arrange everything. You'll have a week to prepare. It won't be a large performance, just a small, intimate gathering. We'll keep it simple for now." Henry nodded, though the anxiety in his chest hadn't gone away. He didn't know what he had just agreed to, but he knew he had no choice now. The world was watching, and he couldn't hide anymore. Over the next few days, he practiced more than he had in years. The piano was still a comfort to him, but now it felt different. Every note seemed to carry more weight, as if he was playing not just for himself, but for everyone who would be listening. He wasn't sure what kind of performance he was supposed to give. Should he play something flashy, something impressive, or should he stick to what he knew, to the music that came from the heart? He decided to trust his instincts and play the way he always had. Lily, who had been a constant source of support throughout all of this, checked in with him regularly. She was excited for him but also worried. She knew how hard this was for Henry, "You don't have to do this, you know," she said one afternoon when they met for coffee. "If you don't feel ready, it's okay to say no. No one's going to judge you for it." Henry looked at her, surprised by her words. "I know, but I think I have to try. I've spent too long hiding from this, from myself. If I don't do it now, I'll regret it." Lily smiled softly, reaching across the table to give his hand a reassuring squeeze. "I'm proud of you, Henry. No matter what happens, I know you'll play with all your heart. And that's what matters most." The day of the performance arrived, and Henry felt a mix of emotions. Nervousness, excitement, fear. The small auditorium was set up with just a handful of chairs, most of them filled with faculty members, some students, and a few invited guests. It was far from a large concert, but the intimate setting made it feel even more personal. Henry stood backstage, his hands shaking as he adjusted his shirt. He could hear the low murmur of voices from the audience, the rustling of programs. He took a deep breath and walked out onto the stage, the spotlight immediately finding him. For a moment, everything went quiet. His heart was pounding in his chest, and he felt a rush of fear. But then he looked out at the crowd, and for the first time in a long time, he felt something different. It wasn't fear that he saw in their faces. It was curiosity, admiration, and even a bit of kindness. Henry sat down at the piano, his fingers resting on the keys. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and began to play. The music was soft at first, a simple melody that he had played so many times before. But as the notes filled the room, he felt his nerves begin to settle. He wasn't performing for them. He was just playing for himself, playing for the music. And slowly, as the melody grew, Henry felt a sense of peace wash over him. The spotlight didn't feel as harsh anymore. The audience didn't seem so intimidating. They were just people, and he was just a man playing the piano. When he finished, the room was silent for a moment, and then a wave of applause broke out. Henry's heart raced, but this time it was different. This wasn't about praise or recognition. This was about connection, about sharing something real with the world, and in that moment Henry knew he had made the right choice. He wasn't just. The applause was louder than Henry had ever imagined. His heart pounded in his chest, and for a brief moment he felt as though everything around him had slowed down. He looked out at the audience, some of them standing, others clapping enthusiastically. It was more than he had ever expected, more than he had ever thought possible. For years, Henry had kept his music to himself, hidden away in the small corners of his life. He had played in silence, away from the world, convinced that no one would ever appreciate it. But now, standing there on stage, he realized that the music had always been his to share, and that maybe he had been holding on to something that others truly needed. As the last few claps echoed through the room, Henry stood still for a moment, allowing the feeling to settle over him. He wasn't sure what he had expected, but this felt different. The nerves had melted away, replaced by something else. A sense of freedom, a sense of release. When the applause finally quieted, Henry took a deep breath. He didn't know what to say. He wasn't used to being in the spotlight, much less speaking to an audience. But as he looked out at the faces in front of him, he felt the need to say something. He needed them to know that this wasn't just a performance for him. It was something personal, something real. "Thank you," he said softly, his voice steady, though it shook just slightly. "I never thought I'd be standing here. I've spent most of my life keeping to myself, doing what I thought I had to do. But today I've shared something with you that's been with me all along. Music has always been a part of me, but for a long time I thought it was something I had to keep hidden." He paused, looking around the room. The audience was quiet, waiting for him to continue. Henry took another breath, finding strength in their attention. "I know I'm not a performer. I'm not someone who's used to being in the limelight. But I believe music has a way of bringing us together. It speaks in ways words can't. And for all of you who've supported me, whether you've known me for years or just saw that video, I'm grateful. I'm grateful for the chance to share this part of myself with you." The silence in the room wasn't uncomfortable. It felt like a moment of connection, of understanding. For once, Henry didn't feel like he was invisible. For once, he felt seen. The audience didn't just clap now. They cheered, they shouted his name. It wasn't because he had played perfectly, he hadn't. It wasn't because he had done something extraordinary. He had simply played from the heart. They cheered because they had seen someone vulnerable, someone real, and that was something people could relate to. Henry smiled, his nerves now fully gone. He had done it. And in doing so, he realized that he wasn't just playing the piano for others. He was playing for himself, for the parts of him that had been buried for so long. As he left the stage, still feeling the rush of the performance, the head of administration approached him with a wide grin. "That was incredible, Henry. I can't tell you how proud we are of you." "This is only the beginning." Henry nodded, though the words didn't quite reach him. He was still caught up in the emotions of the moment. "Thank you," he said simply. Later that evening, he sat in the quiet of his apartment reflecting on everything that had happened. The performance had been a success more than he had imagined. But more than the applause, more than the recognition, what he was really left with was a sense of peace. He wasn't sure where this new path would take him. He didn't know if he would perform again, or if he would go back to his quiet life. But for the first time in a long time, he felt open to whatever came next. He had shared his music, and that was all that mattered. It wasn't about fame or success. It was about being true to himself. The next day, as he walked to work at the academy, he couldn't help but notice the difference in how people treated him. It wasn't just that they recognized him from the video, though that was certainly part of it. It was the way they looked at him now, like they saw him for who he really was. Not just the janitor, not just the man who cleaned up after others, but someone with a gift, someone with something to offer. At first, Henry had been uncomfortable with all the attention. He wasn't used to people looking at him with admiration, to hearing his name spoken with respect. But over time, he began to understand that it wasn't about him, not really. It was about the way his music had touched people, the way it had resonated with them. He had opened a door for others to see what he had always known deep down. That music was a powerful thing, capable of bringing people together in ways nothing else could. One afternoon, as he was cleaning the practice room where he had played the piano for the first time, Clara approached him. She seemed different somehow, more relaxed, more human. The sternness he had once seen in her was gone, replaced by a warmth he hadn't expected. "I wanted to say something," Clara began, her voice more personal than it had ever been before. "I didn't expect what happened. I didn't expect you to play like that. But I'm glad you did. You've shown everyone something important." Henry looked at her, a little surprised. Clara had never been one to offer praise easily. "Thank you," he said, unsure what else to say. Clara smiled, and for a moment Henry could see the teacher she had always been, the one who pushed students to be better, to do more. But there was something else now, too. Something softer. "I've been thinking about it," she continued. "About you and about how we often forget to encourage the people who work in the background. People like you, who make everything run smoothly without anyone noticing. Your performance showed us that we can't just keep focusing on the people in the front. Everyone has a role to play, and everyone deserves to be seen." Henry felt a warmth spread through him at her words. It wasn't just that she was complimenting him. It was that she was acknowledging something deeper, something he had never really heard before. He wasn't just the janitor. He wasn't just someone who did the dirty work. He was a person with his own dreams, his own talents, and his own worth. "Thank you, Clara," he said quietly. "That means a lot." As the days passed, Henry continued to find a new rhythm in his life. The video had changed things for him in ways he hadn't expected. It had opened up opportunities, yes, but more importantly, it had opened his eyes to the possibilities within himself. He had spent so long thinking of himself as invisible, a background character in other people's lives. But now he saw that he was the main character in his own story. He didn't need to chase fame or recognition. He didn't need to prove anything to anyone. All he needed to do was be true to himself, to keep playing the music that had always been there, waiting to be heard. As he walked through the academy one last time before heading home, he realized that he was no longer the same man who had walked in those halls just a few months ago. He had changed. And though he didn't know exactly what the future held, he felt a deep sense of peace. He had found his voice, and it was powerful. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough.